The shears made a soft snip, followed by the faint hiss of petals brushing against my sleeve. The morning light came in thin, deliberate strokes, the kind that paint everything gold before the sun grows bold enough to erase the mystery. Margaret's roses stood proud in their narrow bed along the fence. Hybrid teas, deep crimson, her favorite. I trimmed each one with the patience of a man who had nothing left to rush toward. The dew clung to the leaves like little memories that refused to dry. For 42 years, these roses had bloomed and withered again, as if following her rhythm even after she left. I had never once managed to prune them the way she did. Margaret used to hum while she worked, always the same tune, some half-remembered melody from a film we watched when we were young. Now, the only sound was the distant bark of a dog and the rustle of newspaper against the front porch. Willow Bend was unusually quiet. The young families were still asleep. The retirees, like me, had already begun their morning rituals. I could name them all by the sound of their habits. The screech of Mrs. Redding's garage door. The hollow thud of the paperboy's bicycle wheel. The creak of the porch swing from the Winters house across the street. A quiet neighborhood, and yet I could hear the echo of absence in every sound. Margaret had filled this silence once. Now it was just mine to maintain. I had just reached the last rose bush when the phone rang. It wasn't the shrill house phone, no one called that anymore, but the soft buzz in my shirt pocket. I wiped my hands on my gardening towel and fished it out. The screen lit up. Laura. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, pressing the phone to my ear. "You're up early." Her voice came through sweet and practiced. "Hi, Dad. How are you feeling today? Did you sleep okay?" There it was again, that brightness. A little too bright, a little too careful. The way someone speaks when they're managing a conversation instead of having one. "I'm fine," I said. "Been out pruning your mother's roses. They're a bit wild this year." She made a small, sympathetic sound. "I don't know how you do it, Dad. That garden must be a lot of work for you now." "I like the work," I said simply. "Keeps me steady." Sure. A pause. "But, maybe it's time to think about making things a bit easier on yourself." I smiled faintly. I could almost see her twisting the phone cord. Except there were no cords anymore, only invisible lines where words carried hidden meanings. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, though I already knew. "Oh, nothing dramatic," she said quickly, too quickly. "It's just the house is so big, Dad. You're all alone in there. Maybe something smaller would feel cozier. There's that new retirement community near the lake. Remember the one I mentioned last month? It's lovely. They even have rose gardens." Ah, there it was. The downsized talk again. I leaned on the handle of the shears and looked back at the house. 3 stories of brick and patience. I designed it myself, every line drawn with Margaret beside me. She had chosen the deep green shutters, the bay window in the study, the porch swing where we'd watched so many autumns go by. Downsizing felt like erasing her, 1 square foot at a time. "That's thoughtful of you, Laura," I said, keeping my tone light. "But I'm quite all right here. The roses wouldn't like the move." She laughed, the kind of laugh that was meant to sound indulgent, but carried a thin edge of frustration. "Dad, they're just plants." "Not to your mother, they weren't," I said. "And not to me." There was another pause, longer this time. I heard her exhale softly, then compose herself. "I just worry about you, that's all. You've had a few falls lately." 2, I corrected. "And one was over the cat. She's 20 years old, Dad. Maybe it's time." "To get rid of her too?" I interrupted, smiling to take the sting out of it. She sighed again, softer this time. "I'm just saying you could have more company. Friends your age. Help if you need it. You wouldn't have to cook or mow the lawn. Doesn't that sound nice?" Her words washed over me like the hum of a television in another room, familiar but distant. I'd been an architect long enough to recognize when someone was building toward something. She wasn't just suggesting. She was laying foundation. "I'll think about it," I said. "You promise?" "I'll think about it," I repeated, smiling though she couldn't see it. She exhaled again, lighter now. "That's all I ask. Oh, Mark says hi. Tell him I said hello." "Will do. Love you, Dad." "Love you too, sweetheart." The line clicked off. I stood there for a moment, the shears still in my hand, the phone warm against my palm. The air seemed a little heavier now, the light a little less kind. I stared at the roses, their color deep as spilled wine, and felt something shift beneath the surface of the morning. The truth is, I had heard that tone before, not from Laura, but from clients. The same blend of flattery and persuasion before a proposal was slipped across the table. She wasn't just worried. She was preparing. For what, I didn't yet know. I turned back toward the house, the old floorboards groaning beneath my steps. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender polish and thyme. Margaret's teacups still lined the cabinet. Her sketch of the garden still hung crooked above the fireplace. Every detail remained as she left it, not out of denial, but devotion. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the kitchen window, watching the breeze stir the petals outside. The conversation replayed in my head, each word turning like a cog. Downsize. Retirement community. Company. The phrases folded into one another, too practiced to be casual. I brushed the rim of my mug with my thumb, staring at the reflection of the garden. Somewhere deep down, something stirred, not suspicion exactly, but the faint prickle of design. There was structure beneath Laura's sweetness. She was building towards something. And like any architect, I knew, when someone starts drawing plans behind your back, the foundations of trust begin to crack. The morning passed quietly, but the quiet had changed its shape. It was no longer the peace of routine. It was the pause before a storm. I meant to hang up. The green strip at the top of the screen said Laura was still connected, and my thumb hovered over the red button. Then Mark's voice drifted out like a draft under a door. Did he buy it? Laura, lower than she'd been with me. Not yet. He'll think about it. He'll fold, Mark said. Make it about safety. The realtor says the land's a gold mine, corner lot, original plan. Once he's in the care home, it won't matter. The faucet ran on my wrist until the water went cold. I listened. I booked a tour, Laura said. Paper rustled. And while we're in Italy, I'll have people evaluate the house. He won't push back. Good, Mark said. Get Dr. Patel to bless it. He trusts doctors. Then we sign. The call hiccuped, door wind, and I ended it as if it might burn my hand. The kitchen looked suddenly staged, a bowl of pears, a neat calendar, Margaret's teacup on the rack. Ordinary things recast as props. Anger didn't come. What arrived was a level disbelief. My daughter had turned concern into a lever. A plan, not a tantrum. Measured lines and angles. On the porch, the chain of the swing creaked its private rhythm. I tried the words aloud. Care home. They fell flat. In my mind, beige hallways, a television humming in a room I didn't choose, vegetables steamed to colorlessness. No bay window, no porch rail sanded for Margaret's hands, no roses. Calling Laura back would give them the scene they'd rehearsed. I'd lived inside plans for half a century. You don't shout at a blueprint. You read it. You find the load path. You press where it wants to break. Back inside, the photo of Margaret in the market hat smiled from the fridge. Beneath it, an appointment card from Dr. Patel, next Thursday. That fit their schedule. Tour, doctor's nod, signatures. I opened the drawer with takeout menus and warranties. Buried there was a realtor's card clipped to a note in Laura's tidy script. Met him at Rotary. Free estimate. L. The card's corner was softened by handling. I wrote today's date on the back. Old habit, timestamp what matters. Down the hall, Laura's old room kept her logic. Labeled boxes, trophies, a dusty softball. On top lay a glossy folder, Lakeview Heights. Couples and linen, a croquet mallet mid-swing. A dining room that wanted to be a lobby. We make difficult transitions effortless. For families I supplied. I slid the folder back. The house made a small settling noise. Margaret used to say the place talked when something was wrong. It tells you where to look, she'd say. Tapping trim I had miscut and recut until it behaved. I stood still and listened. Not for words, there weren't any, but for direction. Coffee gave me minutes to think. I didn't drink it. Steam rose and vanished while memory filed itself. Margaret's last weeks. Her hand in mine, her breath thin, her sentence, trust Laura. I had tried. Trust is feeling. Structure is proof. If Laura had a plan, proof would exist. The mail basket held postcards for active living, a flyer from a moving service, and a thin envelope from a bank I no longer used. I set it aside. I wasn't hunting treasure. I was tracing the line, weight, around the thing I loved. By midday, the block had changed key. Mowers, a delivery truck, a radio somewhere. I washed the unused cup and placed it back. The shaking in my hands had gone. Something steadier took its place, like a pencil line from left margin to right. Neat, unbroken. In my study, the old drafting table waited, more sculpture than tool. A mechanical pencil lay, with its point snapped. I rolled it with my finger until it clicked into the tray. Confrontation would hand Laura and mark their cue. Tears, assurances, the plaintive case for safety. Papers sliding across a table while I wiped my eyes. No. Let their plan stand long enough to show where it was weak. I went to Margaret's writing desk. The cherry gleamed. The drawer still stuck a little in warm months. Faint rings from her teacup never quite disappeared. I ran my thumb over one and felt sorrow sharp and clean. Then sorrow resolved into purpose. The drawer held her stationery, envelopes, a capped fountain pen. I slid my fingers along the underside of the divider and felt a ridge of tape. When I peeled it back, a small brass key came free into my palm. Cold, exact. The tape had yellowed to the color of old varnish. I stood there listening to my pulse and the faint murmur of the house. Margaret's laugh flickered through memory. How she hid things in plain sight. She trusted me to find what I needed when I needed it. If the day had a hinge, I felt it turn. The phone vibrated, Laura again. Her cheerful sunglasses photobobbed. I let it ring to voicemail. No message. The next act of their plan would be kind. I held the key to the light. Not a door key, too small. Safety deposit, perhaps. Years ago, we had boxes at Riverside Bank, a lobby I had helped design before screens cheapen it. The thought rose like a memory, unwrapped. Outside, the roses tapped the window. I could almost hear Margaret's amusement. All these years, Elliot, and you still need me to draw the last line. All right, I said to the house and to her. Let's see what you left. I slipped the key into my pocket. The day seemed to brighten by a shade. I turned off the coffee burner, took my old jacket from the hook, and checked for my wallet where it always lived. The porch steps answered under my feet. The roses burned red as if signaling. I looked back once, not in farewell, but in inventory. Bay window, porch swing, Margaret's sketch on the mantel beyond the glass. Things not for sale. Laura and Mark had a plan. So, it seemed, did Margaret. I would follow hers. I didn't sleep that night. The house was too still, as if it were holding its breath alongside me. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway felt like a slow drip of realization, each second confirming what I'd overheard was real. Laura, my little girl, who once cried when she broke my drafting pen, had planned to sell my life out from under me. Not out of necessity, out of greed. The old boards creaked as I moved from room to room. I didn't turn on the lights. The moonlight, spilling through the windows, was enough. It painted everything silver and distant, as though I were walking through someone else's memories, a museum of my own making. I paused in the doorway of our bedroom. Margaret's pillow was still fluffed, her perfume faint but loyal after all these years. She'll take care of you, she had whispered before she slipped away. I had believed her then. Now those words felt like a slow poison. The weight of them pressed down until I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the half-empty closet. Her dresses were long gone, given to charity in the first year after she passed, but one still hung there, the blue one with the pearl buttons. She'd worn it the night we hosted Laura's engagement dinner. She'd been so proud that night, fussing over the table settings, whispering to me about how grown up our daughter looked. And now, that same daughter wanted to lock me away and carve up the remains of her childhood home for profit. I tried to summon anger. It would have been easier. Anger gives you something to hold on to. But what came instead was disbelief, cold, dense, and paralyzing. I wasn't the sort of man people betrayed. I paid my bills. I built houses that stood through storms. I raised my family on patience and honesty. I had believed that foundation would hold. But maybe even the strongest beams rot from within, quietly, long before they fall. I rubbed my temples and tried to breathe through it. Margaret's voice came again, not in sound but in memory. Laura will take care of you. Promise me you'll trust her. Promise me. I had. And now that promise sat like a weight I couldn't put down. Trust was what Margaret asked for. But Margaret had also been deliberate, almost eerily so. She left nothing unfinished, no detail overlooked. In 47 years of marriage, she'd planned everything down to the smallest corner. The color of the drapes, the structure of our wills, the arrangement of her funeral. She had a mind for order, for contingencies. If she saw this coming, even the faintest possibility of it, she would have left a trail. That thought stirred something old in me. The architect, not the husband. I stood and crossed the hall to her writing desk, the small cherry one she'd used since college. Its surface gleamed faintly in the dark. I pulled open the drawers one by one. Bills, letters, stationery, a faded photograph of Laura as a toddler with jam on her cheeks. But nothing else. Then, almost by habit, I ran my fingers along the bottom panel, the place where years ago I had reinforced the drawer's joints for her. My thumb brushed against a small raised edge. I leaned closer and felt again, the thin, waxy ridge of tape. Slowly, I peeled it back. Something metallic clinked softly onto my palm. A brass key. Small. Ornate. Too fine for any household lock. My pulse quickened. Margaret didn't tape things for decoration. She taped them to preserve. The key caught the light, glinting faintly as though it recognized me. On its bow, faintly etched, was a number, 142B. A memory surfaced like a diver breaking through water. Riverside Bank. That was where we'd kept a safe deposit box, years ago, before everything went digital. Margaret had insisted we maintain it for important originals. I'd forgotten all about it, but she hadn't. The key sat warm in my hand now, as if it had been waiting. For me. For this. I sat at the desk for a long while, the house sighing around me. Margaret's handwriting danced through my mind, clean, methodical, looping with purpose. If she left something in that box, it would mean she had expected all this. Laura's ambition, my naivete, the slow erosion of family into transaction. And yet, even now, I hesitated. Because to open that box felt like admitting that my daughter's love was counterfeit, that the house I built was no longer a home. Still, I turned the key over in my palm, again and again. The smooth edges pressed a pattern into my skin. Margaret had built a life on trust, but she had built me on design, and design always leaves backup plans. Finally, I stood and crossed the window. Dawn was a faint smear on the horizon, washing the garden in dull blue. The roses trembled under a light wind. I could almost hear her whisper through them. "Don't let them ruin what we built, Elliot." "I won't," I said aloud, surprising myself with the sound of it. I slipped the key into my pocket and looked around the room one last time. The photograph of us on the mantel caught the first light of morning. Margaret laughing at something just out of frame, her eyes turned toward me. She always looked as though she knew something I didn't. And maybe she did. Tomorrow, I would go to Riverside Bank. Whatever she left for me there, I would find it. For now, I sat back down in her old chair and let the memory of her fill the silence. Somewhere beneath the ache of betrayal, a new feeling began to grow, not rage, not sorrow, but resolve. Because if my daughter thought she could erase Margaret House, she had forgotten who built its bones. Riverside Bank still wore its good suit. Even after management swapped brass for brushed steel and tucked a touchscreen into every flat surface, the bones were mine. I had laid the lobbies grid 40 years earlier. Light wells with the river, marble seams meant to pull you forward. Stepping in felt like walking back into a sketch I'd drawn in the margin of a life that moved faster than I expected. The guard glanced at my cane and nodded. At the desk, a clerk looked up with quick, capable eyes. Her nameplate read Sophie. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you?" I have a safe deposit box, I said, patting the pocket where the brass key warmed. Been some time. Not a problem. She typed, then smiled. Mr. Crane? Box 142B. May I see your ID? I slid my license across. As she compared it, I took in the lobby. The softened echo under the dome, the geometry of the floor, the way light spilled into the corridor. Someone had hung a digital banner that chirped slogans. It felt like a guest talking through the end of a symphony. Sophie returned the card. If you'll follow me. We passed a photo of the ribbon cutting. My hair dark, my suit too big. Margaret's hand was on my arm, her smile so sure I borrowed certainty from it. The corridor cooled as we moved deeper. Noise traded for carpet hush and the faint hum of a fan. At the vault door, Sophie performed a ritual of codes and keys, then ushered me into a narrow aisle of metal faces. Steel boxes like hymnals waiting for the faithful. She gestured. Your key, Mr. Crane. The small brass shape fit without argument. The mechanism clicked like the last tumbler of a long year falling into place. Sophie slid the box out and set it on a small table in a private room. Take your time, she said, and withdrew. I rested my hands on the lid, as if touching the box might transmit a message to wherever Margaret had gone. Then I lifted it. On top lay a sealed envelope the color of old ivory. In her hand, neat, letterpress crisp, even in ink, was written, For Elliot, if you ever doubt them. Beneath it, snug against the metal, was a slim black binder looped by a single elastic. Hello, Maggie, I said, because there was nothing else to say. I opened the envelope. The paper held her scent. The letter was both tender and economical, the voice she used when a contractor was late and a storm was coming. She told me she loved me in 4 lines that contained more architecture than romance. And then she went to work. You build homes, Elliot. I built safety. When love turns to greed, walls must protect what hearts can't. She laid out the trust, the dates, the triggers, the provisions drafted with Evelyn Grant, our lawyer and her old friend, set to activate if any heir attempts to control, sell, or encumber our primary residence without your written, notarized consent. She anticipated not just a move to a care home, but the social pressure that arrives disguised as kindness. I set the letter down. My hands were shaking. The tremor wasn't fear. It was relief finding its hinge. The binder opened with the smell of toner and cloth. Page after page. Assignments, deeds, notarized acknowledgments, witness statements. The house, the garden plot, the accounts we barely touched, all placed in a living trust naming me sole trustee and beneficiary for the remainder of my life. Any attempt to interfere triggered a clause disinheriting the offender from the residue of the estate. A clean line. Come for this house, and you forfeit what's left. There were printed emails to Evelyn. Margaret never believed in single points of failure. An appraisal showed the land value rising like a tide, annotated in her handwriting. If they push, this is why. Dates mapped to the months, when Laura first talked about simplifying, helping us move forward. Margaret hadn't argued. She had built a structure around us and set the mortar while smiling across Sunday dinner. At the back was a document I didn't expect. The charter for the Margaret Crane Foundation, established but dormant, beneficiaries to be designated at the trustee's discretion, with a letter of intent requesting support for Alzheimer's care, caregiver respite, and architectural grants for therapeutic spaces. She had turned foresight into a garden no one else could weed. I exhaled for the first time that day. The betrayal in my kitchen had been a blow. This was a brace fitted to a fracture I hadn't admitted I had. A gentle knock. Everything all right, Mr. Crane? Sophie asked. Yes, I said, and my voice surprised me. Better than all right. She smiled. Take your time. I read the documents again, slower, until the legal phrases arranged themselves into a picture even a tired man could trust. When I closed the binder, a small index card slid free, an address in Evelyn's hand and a note for Margaret. If you need her, she knows. When I stood, my knees remembered their age. But my back remembered its line. I tucked the letter into my jacket and returned the binder to the box. The knowledge I kept in whatever part of the body stores courage. On the way out, I paused by the ribbon-cutting photo. My younger self tried not to grin. Margaret looked at me, not the camera. I nodded to them both. What we built would not be sold out of convenience. At the desk, I thanked Sophie. "Do you like working in this lobby?" I asked. "I do," she said. "It feels intentional." "It is," I said. Outside, the river flashed under noon sun. Cars hummed. I walked slowly, because moving deliberately is not the same as moving late. In my pocket, the envelope warmed the fabric. In my chest, something unclenched. Laura would call again, bright voice, careful doctor, brisk assurances. I would be ready. Not to fight. Fighting is the theater she knows. I would reveal the structure beneath the paint. Margaret had left an invisible fortress. All I had to do was lock the door. The letter trembled faintly in my hands, though I blamed it on the chill of the bank's air conditioning, and not the tremor that had begun to live in my bones. I had read Margaret's note 3 times already, and still, it felt like I was seeing it for the first time. The paper itself carried her presence, her scent, her steadiness, the way her words never meandered. She had written with purpose, not emotion, but somehow every line breathed warmth beneath its precision. "You build homes, Elliot. I built safety. When love turns to greed, walls must protect what hearts can't." The word sat there, neat and measured, the sort of phrase that could fit on a cornerstone. Margaret had always believed in design, not just in the way a room should be arranged, but in the way a life should be secured. She'd seen the world as structure, as interlocking parts, each piece supporting the next. And here she was again, protecting me, years after the sound of her laughter had faded from the hallways. I read the rest slowly, tracing her careful script with my eyes. She detailed everything: the trust, the clauses, the contingency triggers that would activate if any descendant or related party tried to sell or transfer the house without my express consent. Every date matched the milestones of her illness. She'd planned this while the disease crept through her body. Quietly, methodically. She hadn't just written me a love letter. She'd drawn me a blueprint. When I reached the final paragraph, my throat closed. "If you ever doubt Laura, forgive her first, but protect us second." I have seen her world tilt toward Mark's, the hunger in his eyes when he looks at what isn't his. You must stay strong enough to draw the line. That's what architects do. After all, they draw the line. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. My vision blurred, and for a moment I saw her as she was before the illness, sitting at that same desk, her hair pulled back, glasses sliding down her nose as she scribbled numbers in the margins of a recipe book. Margaret had always seen things before anyone else did. I ran my fingers along the spine of the binder again. Every page reinforced the invisible fortress she had built around me. There were photocopies of deeds, notarized amendments, and a power of attorney naming Evelyn Grant as my legal representative if I became incapacitated. Margaret had thought of everything, even the possibility of my decline. There was a small sticky note tucked near the back. I peeled it open. "You'll need Evelyn. She knows the rest." Evelyn Grant. Of course. She'd been Margaret's lawyer for 20 years and one of her closest friends. I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. The thought of calling her now filled me with both dread and relief. If anyone understood the machinery of what Margaret had built, it would be Evelyn. I replaced the binder in its box, though the letter stayed with me. The brass key felt lighter in my pocket as I walked back through the cool corridors of Riverside Bank. Sophie, the young clerk, offered me a kind smile as I returned the key. "All set, Mr. Crane?" "Yes," I said, voice steadier than I felt. More than set. Outside, the daylight had softened. The river moved lazily along the edge of the street, and I paused to watch it. Margaret had loved this view, the reflection of clouds trembling on the surface, the hum of the city softened by distance. She used to say rivers never really change direction. They just find quieter paths. That night, I sat in my study, the letter spread out under the lamplight. The shadows of the window frames crossed it like latticework. The roses outside were dark shapes in the fading light, their scent creeping through the open window. Margaret had left me protection, but also a choice. I could confront Laura and Mark show them the truth, end their deceit with a single revelation. Or I could wait. Let them play out their plan. Let their own greed expose them. The architect in me knew patience was its own kind of design. You don't stop the collapse by shouting at the storm. You wait until the wind shows you where it's weakest. I reached for my notebook, the one I hadn't used since retirement. The first page still bore my old company letterhead, Crane and Lowell Designs. Beneath it, I began to sketch, not blueprints this time, but lines of logic, connections between Margaret's trust, Evelyn's involvement, and Laura's motivations. Every name, every date, every clause became part of the plan. My hand steadied as the lines took shape. By midnight, the first page was filled. Not a structure of wood or glass, but of intent. Margaret had always believed the house was more than shelter. To her, it was a vessel of memory, a promise that outlived both of us. She'd built it to last, and now she'd built its defense to last even longer. As I closed the notebook, I whispered, "You always did think ahead, didn't you, Maggie?" The house creaked softly in reply. And though I was alone, I felt less so. Because now I wasn't just an old man clinging to the past. I was the keeper of Margaret's design, the living part of her blueprint. Tomorrow, I would call Evelyn Grant. Tonight, I let the roses guard the window while I dreamed of foundations that never crack. Morning brought a thin fog that clung to the street like memory reluctant to leave. I moved slower than usual, not from age, but from thought. The letter sat folded in my breast pocket, close enough to feel its presence every time I breathed. Margaret's voice had followed me through the night, that calm, practical tone that could quiet a storm or outthink a schemer. I dialed Evelyn Grant's number just after 9. The line rang twice before a voice answered, brisk yet familiar. "Grant and Associates, this is Evelyn." "Evelyn, it's Elliot Crane." A pause, followed by a soft exhale. "Elliot, good morning. It's been a while." "Too long," I said. "I found something of Margaret's. Something she left for me. I think it's time we talked." Her tone shifted from pleasantry to purpose. "Do you have the documents with you?" "I do." "Then come by my office this afternoon," she said. 3 o'clock. "And Elliot, bring the letter." Her office was on the 12th floor of a glass tower overlooking the city I helped design piece by piece. I'd worked on some of its foundations decades ago, back when cranes dotted the skyline like punctuation marks of ambition. Evelyn's assistant, a young man in a gray suit, led me into a room filled with warm light and neat precision. Everything in that office was deliberate, from the symmetrical arrangement of files on her desk to the subtle placement of family photos, none facing the visitor directly. "Elliot," she greeted, standing as I entered. Her hair was silver now, cut close. Her expression, the same mixture of warmth and calculation she'd always carried. "You look well." "Appearances can be deceitful," I said with a half-smile. She gestured for me to sit. "Margaret said you'd come, one day. She just didn't say when." I blinked. "She told you that?" "She did. In her own way. She had a feeling something might unfold after she was gone, something to do with Laura." Evelyn's voice softened. "She didn't want to burden you with it while she was still alive." I slid the letter and the binder across her desk. "Then you know what this means." She opened the folder, her expression tightening only slightly as she reviewed each page. I watched her eyes move, line by line, clause by clause, her pencil tapping a steady rhythm against the margin. "She thought of everything," Evelyn murmured. "A conditional trust tied to your consent, a forfeiture clause to protect the estate, and a transfer sequence that keeps ownership airtight. I helped draft it, but I didn't realize how detailed she'd become toward the end." "She was preparing," I said quietly. Evelyn nodded. "She was. You know Margaret, she couldn't stand disorder. Even death she wanted tidy." We both smiled faintly, though mine wavered. "She must have suspected Laura," I said. "The letter hints at it. That Mark was influencing her." "She didn't say it outright, but yes," Evelyn replied. "She noticed the change, the impatience, the fixation on your house. She once told me that greed is the only inheritance some people chase early." Her words sat between us, heavy and true. I leaned forward. "Tell me honestly, am I safe?" Evelyn set her pencil down, folded her hands. and looked at me the way a builder looks at the foundation before declaring it sound. Legally, yes. Completely. Margaret structured this trust to activate the moment Laura attempts any transfer or listing without your signature. If she tries, she triggers the forfeiture clause. Everything reverts to your control. She'd lose any claim to the estate. I exhaled slowly. And if they try to force me into a care home? Evelyn's eyes sharpened. They can't. Not without a physician's written assessment of incapacity, and you're of sound mind, Elliot. Don't let them convince you otherwise. They've already started. She frowned. Then you'll need to be careful. Manipulation often begins as concern. I nodded, remembering Laura's syrupy voice on the phone, her feigned affection dripping between every suggestion of downsizing and safety. I want to make sure Margaret's foundation is protected too, I said. She mentioned it in the binder. Evelyn's lips curved into a knowing smile. The Margaret Crane Foundation. Yes. We kept it dormant until you were ready. All assets in the house trust can transfer there at your discretion. Margaret wanted it that way, for you to decide when it becomes legacy instead of property. She thought of everything, I whispered again. She did, Evelyn said softly. But she also knew you'd need to see it for yourself, not just read it. That's why she left the letter, not just the papers. She trusted you'd know when the time came. I sat back, the weight of the last few days pressing down on me. The betrayal, the discovery, the strange, fierce comfort of realizing I hadn't been entirely alone. Evelyn leaned forward. Elliot, I've known you and Margaret most of my professional life. You were builders, both of you. You shaped things that lasted. What she left you isn't revenge. It's design. She wanted you to have peace, not pity. That word, peace, landed like a nail in timber. For years, I had lived in quiet repetition, pruning roses, fixing squeaky doors, surviving the kind of loneliness that doesn't cry but hums softly under the ribs. And yet, Margaret had still been building for me all along. Her last project, hidden behind love and legal language. Evelyn stood, retrieving a folder from her cabinet. Here's what we'll do. I'll review the trust, confirm its current validity with the registrar, and ensure the foundation is properly listed as successor beneficiary. I'll also prepare a letter for you, something to show, if needed, should Laura attempt to act prematurely. I rose, my knees protesting slightly. Thank you, Evelyn. She smiled faintly. Don't thank me. Thank your wife. She saw further than any of us. I left her office with the city stretching wide and silver beneath me. The wind from the river brushed against my face, cool and familiar. I could almost hear Margaret's voice again, steady, amused, certain. By the time I returned home from Evelyn's office, for the first time since she died, melted into a dull orange haze behind the rooftops. The air smelled of cut grass and the faint tang of rain that never came. I stood for a long moment at the edge of the garden, watching Margaret's roses sway in the wind. They seemed almost to nod, approving, perhaps, of the day's work. Inside, the answering machine blinked a red pulse of insistence. One new message. I pressed play, and my daughter's voice poured into the quiet. Hi, Dad. Just wanted to check in. Mark and I finally booked that trip I told you about, Italy. Can you believe it? We fly out next Friday. You have to see the villa. It's unbelievable. Oh, and while we're gone, I might have some people come by to take a look at the house. Just a few informal evaluations, nothing serious, promise. Anyway, love you. Don't overdo it with the garden. The machine clicked, then fell silent. I stood there, hand hovering over the counter, the echo of her words curling like smoke. Some people come by to take a look at the house. So casual, so effortless. The same tone Margaret used when asking me to pick up milk. But behind it, intention, sharp and deliberate. The betrayal no longer stunned me. It settled into something colder now, steadier. Evelyn's words replayed in my mind. She wanted you to have peace, not pity. Peace required action. That night, I sat in the study with a notepad, the letter, and a phone. The plan began to take shape like one of my old blueprints, neat lines, precise spacing, every angle accounted for. By the time the grandfather clock struck 10, I knew exactly what I would do. The next morning, I called Evelyn. "She's bringing in appraisers," I said simply. Evelyn didn't sound surprised. "Then it's time. Time. To move the property." "Move it." Margaret prepared for that too. "The trust can transfer ownership at your discretion to a private foundation. I can finalize it today if you're ready." I hesitated, glancing toward the window. The garden shimmered in the morning light. "Would that mean selling the house?" "No," she said. "It means preserving it. Once transferred, it can't be sold by anyone, not even you. It becomes a charitable asset. The funds generated from the estate, should it ever be leased or liquidated, would go into the foundation your wife created, the Margaret Crane Foundation for Alzheimer's Care." I closed my eyes. The memory of her in that hospital bed came uninvited, her voice thin but determined as she whispered, "Promise me you'll build something that lasts longer than us." She had built it herself, I realized. And all I had to do now was follow the blueprint. "I'll come by this afternoon," I said. Evelyn's tone softened. "Good. Bring the binder." At noon, I put on my old gray suit. The fabric hung loose now, but Margaret always said it made me look like the man who built the house. I tucked her letter into the breast pocket, where it pressed against my heart like a signature waiting for ink. Evelyn's office felt different this time, more final. Papers were arranged in clean stacks. A single pen sat in the center of her desk. She rose as I entered. "Once you sign," she said, "the property will be held under the foundation's name. You'll remain the trustee until your passing. It will stay exactly as it is, untouched, unsellable. A monument to her work." I took the pen. My hand trembled just slightly as I scrawled my name. Evelyn countersigned, sealing the last act of Margaret's foresight. "There," she said. "It's done." I nodded, but my throat tightened unexpectedly. "You know," I murmured, "I thought I built this house for her. Turns out she built it for me." "She built it for what comes after both of you," Evelyn said gently. "That's legacy." That evening, the phone rang again. Laura's name blinked across the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Dad, how are you? Did you get my message?" "I did," I said, keeping my tone even. She laughed lightly. "Good. I just wanted to make sure it's okay if the realtor stops by while we're gone. Totally informal. Just to see what kind of updates the house might need, you know." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, matching her brightness. "You two deserve a break. Don't worry about a thing here." There was a pause, the brief hesitation of someone uncertain whether they've been granted permission or trapped in it. "You're sure?" she asked. "I insist," I said. "Enjoy Italy. I'll take care of everything." Her tone softened with relief. "You're the best, Dad. Love you." "Love you too," I said. When the line went dead, I stood in the quiet kitchen, the ticking clock suddenly loud enough to fill the house. The air smelled faintly of roses through the open window. I looked out at the garden, the dark red blooms shivering under a new wind. The papers were signed. The transfer complete. Margaret's blueprint realized at last. By the time Laura returned from her sun-drenched holiday, she would find her intentions out of date, her plan built on sand, already swept away. I poured myself a glass of scotch and sat by the window, the glass cool in my hand. Outside, the first stars had begun to appear, dim but resolute. "You did it, Maggie," I whispered. "You protected us." For the first time in years, the house felt alive again, not as a relic, but as something fortified. And as I sat there in the glow of the fading day, I understood the quiet brilliance of Margaret's design. Love, she had once said, was the only structure that could stand without walls. But she had built the walls anyway, just in case. The morning Laura and Mark flew to Italy, the neighborhood was wrapped in a slow, bright calm. Birds chattered in the sycamore trees, the mail truck groaned its familiar route, and the world pretended to be ordinary. I stood at the window, coffee cooling in my hands, and watched their car roll away. Laura waved once through the windshield, cheerful, expectant, like the dutiful daughter she still imagined herself to be. I waited until the sound of the engine faded. Then I set the mug down, reached for the folder Evelyn had prepared, and began. There's a strange stillness to decisive days. You don't feel the drama of them while they're happening. They unfold quietly, almost politely, as if they don't want to startle you. Margaret would have understood that. She used to say that the most significant acts in life happen without applause, a signature, a letter, a decision whispered into the right ear. I spent the morning making phone calls. Evelyn confirmed that all legal documents had cleared. The title transfer was recorded. The house, the land, the accounts tied to its upkeep, all belonged now to the Margaret Crane Foundation. My authority remained absolute, but in name, the property no longer belonged to Elliot Crane. It belonged to a cause. To Margaret. It felt right. By noon, a locksmith arrived. His van bore the logo Apex Security and locks, and he was young, early 30s, polite, efficient. Replacing all of them, he asked as I let him in. All of them, I said. New keys, new codes. The old ones are no longer needed. He nodded, didn't ask why. Workers like him learn not to question the wealthy, or the elderly, or those who look like both. As he worked, I walked through the house, through 47 years of rooms that had grown quieter but never empty. The air held a faint scent of lavender and old wood polish. The portraits on the staircase watched me pass like silent witnesses. Margaret's laughter seemed to linger in the corners, faint but loyal. When the locksmith handed me the new keys, I weighed them in my palm. They glimmered slightly, freshly cut, sharp-edged, like truth itself. By the afternoon, movers arrived. Evelyn had arranged everything. They were professionals, discreet. They packed my personal belongings, not all, but enough. Clothes, photo albums, my drafting tools, the rose shears I'd used that morning. I watched as they carried boxes to the van, each thud against the porch echoing like punctuation in the closing sentence of a long chapter. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Evelyn. But I had chosen well. A quiet apartment by the river, 2 miles away, close enough to walk back if I ever wanted to see the house again. When the movers left, the house stood hollow, but proud. Empty rooms reveal architecture, the real bones beneath the furniture and paint. Margaret had always said a home without noise still hums with the memory of conversation. Standing there now, I understood. In the kitchen, the phone blinked, another message. I pressed play. Dad, just checking in from Rome. The flight was so long, but worth it. The villa's incredible. You'd love the view. Anyway, we're meeting with the realtor once we're back, but don't stress, okay? Just let the appraisers in if they show up. Love you. Her voice, recorded joy, fell hollow. It wasn't love. It was habit. A daughter's voice on autopilot. I smiled at the irony. By the time she returned, there would be no house to sell. The appraisers would find new locks, and a sign bolted into the gate. Private property, owned and managed by the Margaret Crane Foundation. Unauthorized entry prohibited. I pictured Laura's face when she read it, the confusion, the dawning panic, the realization that the ground beneath her inheritance had vanished. Not by theft, but by design. At sunset, I made one last walk through the garden. The roses were in full bloom, defiant in their beauty. I clipped one stem, deep red, perfectly opened, and placed it in a small glass vase. The last rose I'd take from this garden. When I locked the front door, the click sounded final. Not tragic, not bitter, just final, like the closing of a well-built door. The next morning, I woke in my new apartment. Smaller, simpler, but with a window that overlooked the river Margaret had always loved. The light here was different, gentler somehow. I set the rose on the kitchen table and made coffee. Later, I sat at my desk, unfolded Margaret's letter once more, and read it aloud. Not for answers this time, but for company. She had written with such clarity that her voice almost lived between the lines. When love turns to greed, walls must protect what hearts can't. I touched the paper and smiled. The house, her final design, was safe. Laura and Mark's illusion, their inheritance, their plans, had dissolved quietly in the space of a single signature. Online, their vacation photographs had begun to appear. I wasn't much for technology, but curiosity got the better of me. Laura's face filled the screen, tanned, smiling, a wine glass in hand. Captions like "Living Our Best Life" and "When in Rome" dotted each image. I scrolled through them, not with anger, but with a detached calm. I understood now that greed was just another form of fear. Fear of having less, fear of becoming invisible. The irony was almost poetic. As she posted pictures of sunsets over the Amalfi Coast, the home she schemed for was no longer hers to covet. Margaret would have found the symmetry amusing. When the last light of day began to fade across the river, I poured a small glass of scotch and raised it toward the window. "To you, Maggie," I said quietly. "Your walls held." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like an old man outliving a story. I felt like part of a design still unfolding, a structure Margaret had drawn. The first sign that they were back at a time was the sound of tires somewhere crunching on the gravel driveway. It was late afternoon. Sunlight slanted through the blinds of my apartment, painting golden bars across the wall. I had been reading the paper, or at least pretending to. The truth was, I'd been waiting for this moment all week. From my window by the river, I couldn't see Willow Bend. But I didn't need to. I could picture every detail. Laura's car rolling to a stop, the trunk still dusted with Italian sand. Mark stepping out first, stretching, sunglasses hanging from his collar. I could imagine Laura's excitement turning to confusion as she noticed the new locks, the sign, the house standing silent and unfamiliar, her inheritance gone ghostly in her absence. I didn't have to be there to hear it. I could see it as clearly as one of my old blueprints. At that very hour, Evelyn called. "They've arrived," she said simply. "I know," I replied. "How did she take it?" There was a pause. "Badly. The realtor was with them. Poor man looked like he wanted to vanish into the hedges. Laura screamed something about fraud. Mark tried the back gate and nearly broke it." I allowed myself a quiet chuckle. "That's my gate," I said. "She'll call you," Evelyn warned. "Don't answer right away. Let her sit with it." "I intend to." "Good," Evelyn said. Margaret would have approved. Her words left a gentle silence between us. Then she added, "Elliot, for what it's worth, this wasn't revenge. This was justice done kindly." "Kindness was always Margaret's style," I said. When the call ended, I turned the letter over in my hands once more. The paper had begun to soften at the edges, worn from the touch of my fingers. The ink, though, was still bold, steady, like her. I set it down, stood, and walked to the small table by the window. The rose I'd taken from the garden had begun to wilt, its petals folding inward. I replaced the water, though I knew it wouldn't help much. "Nothing beautiful lasts forever," Margaret used to say, "but the meaning it leaves behind can outlive anything." The phone rang an hour later. "Laura." I let it buzz twice before answering. "Dad." Her voice was tight, breathless, frantic. "What did you do? Why are there new locks? Why is there a sign that says the house is part of some foundation?" I waited a heartbeat before replying. "Because it is." "What?" she snapped. "Dad, what are you talking about? You can't just give away the house. It's our family home. It's mine." "Yours." I asked softly. "Since when, Laura?" There was a pause, jagged and cold. "You know what I mean," she said, her tone shifting, desperate now, searching for footing. "You're 74, you live alone, you're not thinking clearly. Mark and I were trying to help you. We wanted you somewhere safe." "You mean somewhere sellable," I said. "That's not fair," she snapped. "We thought." "I heard you, Laura," I interrupted, my voice calm but edged. "The day you called. You didn't hang up properly. I heard everything you and Mark said about the land, the realtor, the care home. Every word." Her silence was immediate. I could almost feel the air on her end go still. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, wounded. "Dad, I didn't mean." "Yes, you did," I said gently. "But that's all right. You just didn't expect your mother to mean what she said either." She swallowed audibly. "Mom. She built the foundation that now owns the house. She planned it long before you tried to sell it. Every clause, every line, every safeguard. She knew this day might come." "That's," Laura's voice cracked. "That's impossible." I smiled sadly. "You always underestimated her. You thought she built homes for comfort. She built them for endurance." There was nothing but breath for a few seconds, ragged on her end, steady on mine. What am I supposed to do now? She asked finally, her voice brittle. Live, I said. Not from what I leave behind, but from what you build for yourself. The way your mother wanted. You've ruined everything, she whispered. No, I said quietly. You did that when you tried to sell what you never owned. I could hear her cry then, not loud, but real. A sound that reached through the years of small betrayals and distant calls. And in that moment, I felt the ache of what I'd lost, not just the daughter I once knew, but the simple trust that had died quietly between us. Goodbye, Laura, I said softly. Take care of yourself. The line went dead. That evening, I walked to the riverside path behind my building. The air was cool, the water smooth as glass. Lights shimmered on the surface like 1,000 trembling stars. I thought about Margaret, her patience, her plans, her way of folding love and foresight into the same gesture. She had seen what I could not. That legacy isn't something you pass down. It's something you protect from being misunderstood. In the distance, the city lights glowed against the dusk, quiet and steady. I felt her beside me then, not as memory, but as design, the invisible symmetry that holds everything upright when time tries to wear it down. When I returned home, I took the rose from the vase. Its petals had begun to fall, curling in on themselves. I placed one on the windowsill, just as Margaret used to, a small offering to the woman who'd drawn the blueprint of my final piece. Then, for the first time in years, I allowed myself to sleep without leaving the lamp on. The world, I realized as my eyes closed, was finally in order again. 3 days passed before the letter arrived. The envelope was ivory, hand-addressed in familiar, looping script. Laura's handwriting, slower than usual, less certain. It had been years since she'd written me anything longer than a birthday card. I stood in my small kitchen, the morning light spilling through the blinds, and turned it over in my hands. For a moment, I considered not opening it. Some words, once read, can't be unread. But Margaret always believed in seeing things through. I slid a butter knife beneath the flap and unfolded the paper. The ink had bled slightly in places, as if her hand had trembled or a tear had fallen. Dad, I don't know where to start. Mark's gone back to his brother's for a while. He says I handled things badly. Maybe he's right. Maybe I did. But everything feels wrong now. The house, the sign, it doesn't feel real. I keep thinking I'll wake up and find it all undone. I'm angry, yes. But underneath that, I think I'm mostly ashamed. I didn't see what Mom had done or what she was trying to teach us. Maybe I didn't want to. I thought I was helping you. That if I could simplify things, sell the house, maybe it would ease the weight of you being alone. But that's not true, is it? It wasn't about you. It was about me. About what I wanted. You always told me a home is where trust lives. I forgot that. I saw Evelyn yesterday. She told me you're all right. She said you're still in town, by the river. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I needed to write anyway. I'm sorry, Dad. For everything. Laura. The words blurred for a moment, and I had to take off my glasses to wipe them. Regret is a heavy thing to see on paper, especially from someone whose voice you used to know by heart. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into its envelope, and placed it on the mantel beside Margaret's photograph. The photo was slightly faded now, the corners curled. Her smile tilted as if she were holding back a secret. She always had that expression when she knew more than I did. Well, Maggie, I murmured. You were right again. The apartment was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the clock. I sat in my chair by the window, watching the lights shift across the river. The current was slow, deliberate, as if the water itself remembered where it had come from. There was peace in the stillness, not the sterile quiet of loneliness, but the calm that follows after everything has settled where it belongs. Laura's apology didn't erase what she'd done, but it softened the edges of the wound. She had finally stopped pretending, and that was enough for now. Forgiveness, I thought, was less about forgetting and more about accepting the shape of what remains. I looked at Margaret's photo again. You always did build with foresight, I said, even in the people you loved. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out her wedding band, the one she'd asked me to keep after she passed. I turned it between my fingers, feeling the faint engraving on the inside. For every tomorrow we build. It caught the light, glinting like a quiet promise. I slipped it back onto my finger. It still fit, though my hands had grown thinner. On the table beside me sat the original key to the old house. I hadn't told Evelyn I'd kept it. It wasn't sentiment that made me hold on to it, not entirely. It was connection, a small, tangible proof that what Margaret built still existed beyond the reach of time and greed. As evening came, I lit the small lamp on the mantel. The glow touched the photograph, the letter, the ring. 3 fragments of a life, past, present, and promise, aligned perfectly by accident or intention. Margaret would have called it symmetry. I poured a cup of tea, stronger than usual, and took it to the window. The sky outside burned with the last colors of sunset, amber bleeding into rose, fading into deep blue. Somewhere out there, Laura was probably sitting in her car, staring at the house she could no longer claim, realizing that not everything can be bought or salvaged. And maybe, just maybe, that realization would be the beginning of something better for her. For me, it was enough to know that Margaret's final design had held. The walls stood. The roses bloomed. The past was safe, and the future, whatever shape it took, could begin without fear. I lifted my cup toward the photograph on the mantel. "To you, Maggie," I whispered, "the architect of everything that mattered." The clock ticked on, unhurried. The world outside dimmed, soft and familiar. And for the first time in years, I felt completely, profoundly, home.